we are going to dive deep into the life of a youth activist and role model. What motivates people to get out there and advocate for issues in society they believe need to be changed? In this interview, we want to uncover how activists fight for a better future, the challenges they encounter, and of course, the rewards of doing this type of work. Let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linny Peavy. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a fourth-year student attending St. Thomas University, majoring in psychology and minoring in environment and society.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Polches. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a second-year student at STU. I'm double majoring in psychology and environment society. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the land we are gathered on. St. Thomas is located in the traditional territory of the Wolastoqey Nation, whose ancestors, along with those of the Mi'kmaq and Passamaquoddy nations, signed peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1770s. These treaties, which did not cede or surrender any territory to the British colonizers, are confirmed and recognized in the 1982 Canada Constitution. We respect the territorial claims of the Indigenous peoples to these lands and look to them for guidance as we learn about and work to resolve the environmental crisis.
We are so excited and grateful to be joined by youth climate activist Sabrina Guzman Skotnitskyn. Sabrina is currently working on her master's in environmental studies at the University of Victoria and previously did her bachelor's honoring in international development studies at Dalhousie University. Aside from her studies, Sabrina has worked as an associate and international policy specialist with the Youth Climate Lab, as well as surveying for the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity and working with the Emerging Youth Consultancy. At this point, we'd like to turn the mic over to Sabrina and let her introduce herself and mention anything else she would like to tell us before we get into our interview questions.
Hi, thank you so much. It's very exciting to join you today. I am calling in today from so-called Victoria, which is on the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, as well as the Wasanich peoples. And I'm very grateful to be studying here at the University of Victoria in the Political Ecology Lab at University of Victoria. I always kind of struggle to figure out what my exact title is, but I find that climate justice advocate and researcher kind of encompasses a lot of the different work that I do. And I've been involved in the climate justice movement since I was about 15 years old, and have done a lot of work from coast to coast, having lived and organized in Halifax, in Jibuktuk as well.
After our introductions, Sabrina told us about her environmental activism. Describing her work as diverse and under a climate justice banner, she elaborated on what this looks like in action.
To me, climate justice is looking at the ways in which climate change and environmental issues intersect with social justice issues and creating solutions which prioritize equity and center those who are most disproportionately impacted. For me, that's led me to focusing on supporting young people especially, and especially those from marginalized communities, to be able to fully step into their leadership and contribute to climate action in the ways that make sense for them and their communities. So that's looked like reducing barriers for youth to enter the environmental sector, helping youth better understand and engage in climate policy, and now with my graduate research, looking at how we can help youth cope with climate anxiety and generate active hope.
That's awesome, Sabrina. Thank you so much. We were wondering what motivated you to become involved in environmental activism. Were there any particular events or experiences that motivated you to become involved in the movement?
When I was in grade 10, I started volunteering in my local park, removing invasive species. And around that time, I also got involved with an organization in Vancouver called Kids for Climate Action. Before that, most of my volunteering and like my passions were around social justice and social justice issues. But it wasn't until I joined Kids for Climate Action and I learned about how like we as youth are disproportionately impacted, but how different various communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change. I realized that like this was the issue I had to work on. And especially I realized that youth had a unique voice and a unique power that we can use to mobilize other people to take action.
Using Bill Moyer's conceptualization of the four roles of activism, we asked Sabrina which role she felt most aligned with throughout different periods in her life.
I definitely began very much more in that, I guess, rebel category. I started organizing actions with Kids for Climate Action, as I mentioned, and we did a lot of campaigning and lobbying and protesting. I also worked with the fossil fuel divestment movement at my campus, etc. And so that was like a large part of my early years of being involved. And then since the pandemic and other life changes, I would say I've shifted more into what I call an advocacy role, which I suppose fits more over the change agent or sometimes the reformer. And I work more directly like with government and other institutions to make change, and especially with nonprofits to create projects to educate and activate youth to engage in the climate movement.
That's great. I think it's awesome that you've kind of been able to go throughout the different roles throughout your life. Is there one that you would say like was your favorite maybe that you align with, or maybe the rebel, is that maybe your favorite role that you've taken on?
I definitely identify more with the change agent now. And I think it's because it's just where my current interests, but also my skills really align. I think every role is really important. And I just realized that the rebel one was not really for me for multiple reasons. But like one big reason was burnout and feeling like I was basically, it's kind of when you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Like I was trying to squeeze myself into this role that I thought I needed to be a real activist, and realized that actually I'm really good talking to people, making connections, collaborating across differences politically and across differences just in different sectors. And I really like bringing people together. And so I actually, yeah, find that's a much better role for me.
So it seems like your theory of change kind of shifted then. So what would you say now is your understanding of how the kind of change you want to happen might come about?
I've come to realize that there's space for everyone in the climate justice movement. And what we actually need is people in every facet of society and people doing every role to create the better future that we need. And so for me, my theory of change is that if we're able to equip people with the skills, opportunities, and resources they need to take action and find their niche in the climate movement, we'll be able to get that better future because everyone will be able to contribute their unique lived experiences, worldviews, gifts, and passions. And there's no way, if everyone is doing that, that we won't be successful.
That is just like such a perfect answer. I know there's no perfect answer to the change, but like just bringing like little bouts of different roles and different lived experiences is so important. And I know you work a lot with youth and inspiring youth to get involved and to help them with the struggles of kind of having this burden of not really participating directly with climate change, but having to live with those effects. What do you think is the value of having youth engaged in activism?
It's everything. I mean, youth are not just the future, we are the present. And we do have the most at stake, but we also have the most energy, creativity, and willingness to act out of all the generations. And I think when we put forward the solutions and we put forward these ideas, we can really rally people to support us in a way that I feel like is very unique. And I've been seeing so much innovation as far as climate solutions come out of youth-led projects and research. And it's just really inspiring because I feel like we really recognize that even if we don't have degrees in climate science or 20 years experience, we have lived experience and we have positionalities, and our hopes and dreams are really important as well. And so we bring that very specific insight into these conversations.
You said earlier that when you were younger, you took on a rebel role and you experienced burnout. Could you talk a little bit about that and what this burnout felt like and how that experience changed the way you engage in activism now?
part of the burnout was trying to kind of prove myself that I was an activist and kind of feeling like I always had to say the right thing, do the right thing, give that extra, hour or more, like always working more and more. Like in my last year of university, which is when I really burnt out. And, at that time I was doing 4 classes, working in sustainability for my student union, also organizing, doing stuff around divestment. And it was just like every second of my time was consumed. And I think also a hard part of that was because I was studying these complex issues and also working on them. I was just thinking about climate change and climate justice like 24 hours a day. And there was no real cognitive break or like break for my mind to like not be thinking about it. And so, that was a really big factor. And another big factor, which I actually write about in my undergraduate honors thesis, was toxicity in some of the organizing circles I was a part of, where there really was this culture of martyrdom. Like you were expected to push yourself as hard as possible. You were expected to have the right behavior, have the right politics, have the right language. And if not, you were afraid you were going to get called out or canceled or you would be shamed. And so that was a really big burden that I was holding around with me until I kind of shifted. And I mean, a lot of this happened with COVID because it just kind of stopped all activism for me. But in a sense, it kind of saved me because it gave me a time to reflect on this and decide what I wanted to do going forward.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in, but it's reassuring to hear people talk about this stuff instead of kind of silence it because it's such a shared experience. So I'm glad that you've been able to kind of find ways of leaving that grief and that burnout and stepping away a little bit, but still keeping activism real in your life, just in different ways. What types of skills do activists use, and how can emerging activists develop these skills to better engage and advocate in spaces that are meaningful to them?
I would say there's very different skills that you need for each role, but I guess some that are kind of, you'll find that they are useful in most situations would be critical thinking skills, collaboration, active listening. A lot of it is working with people. So listening is such a core skill. Collaboration across difference. I kind of spoke about this a bit earlier, but really understanding how to communicate to different audiences that have different levels of knowledge and putting it in words and terms that are easily understandable, but also connect with their values. Another thing is leadership, and leadership can look like a lot of different things. I think it's not just the person who has the megaphone at the rally. Often it's the person who is figuring out, okay, how are we going to get supplies to this, frontline community up north? How are we going to make sure that everyone feels safe at this protest and that we have someone who will liaise with police if they show up? Like there's a lot of different ways that leadership can look like, but really it's developing those skills so you feel confident in whatever type of activism you're doing, but you also feel like you can support the people who are organizing with you.
Thank you so much. I agree. Like there's so many skills that like not just one person has to have. It can be like a diverse range of people involved, which makes movements really awesome.
So, what would you say has been the most rewarding part of your activism, if you could pick one?
It's a tough question because there are so many rewarding moments. I think if there weren't, I probably wouldn't have made it this far. But for me, I think whenever I do get to connect with other youth who are doing this work, and I just realize the diversity of ways to act, and it just really inspires me, but also comforts me a lot because I realize, oh yeah, I don't have to do everything because people are doing so many different things and they're doing what they're good at. And so if I stick to my niche and that's where I can contribute the most. And so it actually takes a load off my shoulders and gives me more energy whenever I get to connect with other young people.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that like being an activist doesn't have to be like the perfect role. Like you're always growing, you're always learning things and how to make yourself more balanced in that role. And that's such an important point. Something that I was really interested in was how open you are with your identity within different interviews that you've done and on your different social medias, being an open bisexual woman of mixed Mexican and European descent. And we were wondering how the concept of intersectionality has shaped your experience working in youth climate activism or just in general, really.
Intersectionality is so core to my understanding of climate justice and a variety of topics. For me, it's very complicated because I am white passing and I hold a lot of privilege in a lot of different spaces. And so for me, I think the way that my identity informs how I go forward is understanding my privilege, but also experiencing these different things, like growing up going to Mexico and noticing the disparities between there and here, and just the precarity of people, especially around climate impacts, but also recognizing that that's not my personal experience. I'm able to go back to Canada or go to somewhere that's safer from different impacts. And so I really want to use my privilege where I can to contribute to the movement and to help lift up more marginalized voices. And so I'm really careful about that, but I also share it because it's an important part of who I am. And being queer as well, like a lot of my organizing has also been with the queer community. And it's actually quite interesting. There was a study from the Cascade Institute that had a big survey of youth in the climate justice movement, and a large percentage of them are queer and are women or femme identifying. And that's so much been my experience that most of the people I've organized with have been LGBTQ plus and have been women. And I kind of love that is such, that's become more recognized now, because I think that really informs what draws us to the climate movement, but also informs our focus on equity as we're making climate solutions.
Yes, that's awesome. I'm like grinning ear to ear hearing you talk.
So I noticed that you have an Instagram page and we checked it out and we've seen your beautiful art. We were just wondering if you could tell us about your arts as a means for dealing with and reducing or coping really with climate anxiety and eco grief.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Art has really become such a comfort and support for me. I really only started painting again in my third year of university. I was one of those art kids that kind of stopped and was like, I have to get serious about the world, and then only returned to it as an adult. And it's been so validating. I don't know what the word is, but it's been amazing to see how I can actually bring this passion for art that I thought had to be aside from my climate work into that work, and to bring it into my research. And what I found, at least for myself, is that there's just a lot of therapeutic qualities to expressing these intense emotions that we have inside, and putting that like either pen on paper or paint on a canvas. And really, it helps us to externalize those intense emotions and then be able to kind of reflect on them from more of a third person point of view. And it's not so intense and immediate. And the second part of it is I find that it really is helping other people. When I've shared my art, I've had feedback from people that was like helpful to them to see that other people were feeling this way and that they weren't alone in feeling that way. Or, I write artist statements for my artwork and they'd be like, wow, so nobody's ever worded it like that. And I totally resonate with that. So there's benefits both on the creating the artwork, but also seeing artwork that affirms our own lived experiences. And so what I'm really excited for my master's research is that I'm basically going to be inviting youth in Vancouver to create their own artwork around climate anxiety, but also around what a better future might look like. And so I'm going to hopefully be able to, through this process, support them in creating their own artwork, and then hopefully then share that with the public, because I think there's a benefit both to the individual, but to the audience that might see that artwork.
Well, I know I certainly was inspired by your art.
Yeah, I think it's really reassuring to see that there are modes of dealing with things like difficult topics or difficult feelings, because a lot of times I find especially youth can get very overwhelmed to not really know how to put these feelings into action or into resolution. So we wanted to give you the space to touch on anything else that we might not have talked about, or if there's any questions that you have for us.
Yeah, well, if I can make a quick plug, one of the areas that we didn't talk as much about is my work around green jobs. And so that is really, activism, of course, is a really important route, but that also is a privilege, right? Volunteering, doing unpaid labor is a privilege because it means you don't have to, you can spend that time away from other commitments, from, working to support yourself financially. And so a lot of youth who might be low income or maybe even homeless don't have that privilege. And so that's why I'm also interested in green jobs as a way for youth to not only be able to find, decent, meaningful work, but also support themselves and not have to choose between doing what they care about and paying rent and having money for groceries. And so that's why I've done a lot of different research. I do a lot of speaking engagements around green jobs, but also the plug I was going to make is on LinkedIn. We have a Youth Green Jobs Network. So folks are totally open to join that. And basically, we just share green jobs from across Canada that are open. And a lot of them are specifically for youth, but there's a wide range. And we also share other resources. And hopefully that can connect people with some opportunities.
I'm really glad you touched on that, actually, because we were reading about that, but we couldn't fit everything in. And I'm really happy that got to fit into our discussion today. Now, this is wrapping up all the questions that we had prepared for our interview. We just want to again thank you, Sabrina, for carving out the time to sit down and talk to us about your role in environmental activism. And it's really stories like these that inspire youth to get involved with the diverse range of possibilities people can do within the environmental movement. Now, before we go, I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to give yourself a little promotion, not just what you're doing with your work, but where people can find out more about you or get in touch with you or follow you along your journey, whether that's like your social media or website or anything like that.
Oh, that's great. So my Instagram is Sabrina Skotman, which is Skotman. And Creating with Sabrina is my art account. And then you can find me by my full name on LinkedIn. I accept everyone, so I'm very happy to connect. I also offer, if people want to reach out to have a one-on-one conversation about green jobs or other, advice you might want around the climate justice movement. And I guess the last thing I'll mention, this was a project I was part of at Youth Climate Lab before I left, but it's called the Youth Climate Toolbox. Youthclimatetoolbox.com is how you can find it. And that's a great platform where we really worked hard to create resources on a variety of climate skills. And they're organized under different categories. So you don't have to just read. There's a listen, there's an imagine, there's an act category. And so would love if people explore that too, because that was like a lot of hard work from the Youth Climate Lab team. And we really did it for the youth in this space. And so hopefully people can use it and make things happen.
That's great, Sabrina. Thank you for that information. And thank you for agreeing to do this interview. It was a pleasure to hear your insights into environmental activism in your work. We, and I'm sure many others, look forward to seeing where your journey takes you.
Thank you so much.
We had the chance to touch on so many important topics with youth climate activist Sabrina Guzman Skotnitsky. What she shared with us is a reminder that there is no cookie-cutter way to fight for your vision of a better future. Everyone's experience is different, and we hope that you can find your own motivation and follow in the footsteps of your role models.